My wife cheated on me during quarantine. I feel compelled to provide some context preceding the cheating. If not for you, then for me, because writing is very therapeutic for me, and I need more trauma therapy than I've ever needed in my life. Please bear with me. This is a long post. My intention here is not to smear my wife's name in mud and point all fingers at her. I'm going to try to keep this as balanced as possible by owning my mistakes and focusing on the facts of her actions rather than who I believe she is as a person. I despise this because as I write it, I feel like I deserve all of the blame. And in some cases, I do, but every story has two sides. My previous marriage ended in divorce, and I have a 14-year-old daughter from that marriage. To cut a long story short, my ex-wife was a bad person, and I had to protect my daughter's safety. I was granted full custody, while the mother opted out by relocating from Texas to a European country. Despite the trauma to myself and my 4-year-old daughter, I fought to maintain some sort of connection between the two. When it became more convenient, I set up virtual dates via phone or video. She hasn't always been there for our daughter, but it hasn't been like her two other boys from past marriages, with whom she has had no contact for 12 and 16 years, respectively. Needless to say, I was relieved to be able to resume my life. It took me approximately 3 years, but I finally discovered what I thought was a wonderful lady who might maybe step in as a mother figure for my kid. 2 years later, this lady became my wife. Despite their imperfections, I find a lot of good in people. Who am I to pass judgment on someone who has so many flaws? I want someone who can recognize the good in me and not get caught up in the little details. I saw my wife for who she was at her core and fell in love with her. She is the most dedicated individual I've ever encountered. Things didn't start out well in the stepmother/daughter relationship since my daughter's biological mother was drifting away at this time. She stopped paying child support and turning up for virtual dates. I was soon thrust into the center of a 7-year-old young girl who couldn't comprehend why her biological mother wasn't around and a lady I was falling in love with. The following 3 years were tremendously stressful, and I didn't handle it well as my soon-to-be wife informed me all of the mistakes I made while parenting my kid on my own. I did the best I could, y'all. Over the following several years, my father lost his wife to lung cancer, my stepmother, who was like a mother to me, and my father was diagnosed with emphysema. He lost his home, so I forced him to move in with me. So it's just myself, my new wife, our newborn baby boy, and my daughter from a prior marriage at this point. I deal with stress in 2 ways. I either overeat since I grew up quite poor and never had any food, or I get really agitated and shout, "This is my biggest struggle," and I work on it every single day. There have been days when I was irritated all of the time because I was put in the between of not only my new wife and kid, but also my wife and my father, who isn't very easy to live with. The more I grew, in terms of weight gain, the more I became furious as a result of the crushing tension. It came to the point where I was yelling a lot at my preteen daughter. I got in her face, yelled cruel things and terrified her, unintentionally, because I couldn't handle the tremendous stress my wife put me under and the attitude my kid was giving me. I even forced my father out of the house for a year, which resulted in his being homeless and living out of his vehicle. Every day, I was worried I'd discover him dead in his vehicle since he had nowhere to go and slept in the parking lot near our apartment in the cold. Things had been tough with my wife for years, and at this time, we have a 2-year-old boy and discovered she was pregnant. With our youngest son, we began seeing a marital counselor and have been going to counseling on our own. We were under a lot of stress just before Christmas in 2019. Things between her and I were still strained. We hadn't had in 3 years, maybe 30 times in that time period. Despite the tension, I believe the treatment was beneficial, and my anger was well managed but not fully gone. Around this time, our youngest kid had the sick and couldn't stop vomiting. We had to admit him to the hospital, and he wasn't released until around midnight on Christmas Eve/day. To make matters worse, my wife had the illness, as did I, while sleeping on a small, uncomfortable hospital sofa. My mother-in-law, who I despise, was also in town, and she became ill. Tensions were high, and despite all that was going on, My wife found ways to press every button I had when we arrived home. She kept telling me that she couldn't depend on me to care for our kid despite my advising her to go home and rest since she was unwell and I was still sleeping at the hospital next to our 2-year-old son. When I questioned her about her claims, she expressed no remorse and proceeded to press those buttons. In irritation, I grabbed up a car seat close to my feet and flung it on the other side of the house, away from my wife. I had no clue, but my mother-in-law was sleeping on the sofa near where it fell, and regardless of how I felt about her, I felt terrible for what I had done. I then had to put up with my MIL telling me that I needed to be on medicine, which I was, and acting as if I was the only one to blame, which I wasn't. Privately, I persuaded my wife to agree that it was her actions that precipitated the dispute, but when it came to her mother, she refused to defend me while the MIL berated me. And it was a case of the pot calling the kettle black to the extreme with my MIL. The whole affair was terrible, but this occurrence was a watershed moment in my fury. My rage has been generally under control for the previous 7 months. I was turning into a strong parent figure and a kind spouse. I was able to completely open up to my therapist about my suppressed history and realized that I had been and physically abused throughout my childhood. I was by a family member, by youngsters down the street from my grandparents' home, and assaulted by a person at the hotel where we slept. I also remembered being physically molested by a babysitter for a while, as well as being beaten by my mother. This is why I've been so upset, despite the fact that I was making a huge breakthrough in my life. I was overjoyed to be able to share my development and self-discoveries with my wife. During the quarantine, my wife and I have been working from home, and as you might expect, tensions have been high. She's been spending a lot of time away from home for the past several months or so. It might be up to 4-5 days each week. She'll either work out with our childcare provider, with whom she's buddies, or with employees. Since we've been pent up for so long, I thought the distance between us was a good thing. My marriage seemed to be getting back on track. We even began having a bit more after some heartfelt discussions about how my weight, and her weight, had affected her enjoyment. It all made sense since she has never been a very person in her life, due to her own traumas. I was feeling so wonderful that I started writing a self-help essay to share my insights with others and aid anybody who needed it. I'd become suspicious of my wife's trips during the previous several weeks. A lot of things didn't make sense. She began hiding her phone away as I passed by, something she never did, and our discussions seemed different. She made arrangements to go out to dinner with a colleague we both knew a week before our anniversary. She kissed me goodbye and said she loved me. It wasn't a short peck on the cheek of someone you owe a kiss to. There was love in there somewhere, or so I thought. Her supper was late, so she texted me saying she was going to play pool, and that she loved me while sending some kissy emoji, which was entirely out of character for her, using those emojis. I had a feeling something was awry. It was already 12:30 a.m., when she should have been home at 9/10 p.m., and I still hadn't heard from her. I had put both of our boys to bed and sat up waiting for her, worried since she had not returned any of my texts. I was able to tap into her Google account and ping her smartphone to determine if she was at a suspicious place, like being in an accident or broken down. She was in a town 40 miles distant from where we lived, far from where she said she was supposed to be. I got in my car and headed over there to see if I could locate her vehicle. I arrived at 1 a.m. and found her automobile parked in front of a residence I didn't know. My daughter contacted me about this time, wondering where I was. I'm not sure what it was about our talk, but I had the impression she knew more than she was saying. I continued telling her I was searching for her mother because I was concerned, and it wasn't unusual for her to be gone for such an extended period of time. My daughter continued attempting to persuade me that everything was okay and that she was probably just hanging out at a friend's home. The more we chatted, the more I became concerned that my daughter was withholding something. As a result, I pretended to be more frightened than I really was at the time. I told her I was going to contact the authorities because I was scared she had been abducted or had been in an accident, despite the fact that I was standing behind her vehicle. I had been pacing behind my wife's vehicle for an hour, and it was now 2 a.m. She hadn't come out yet. Her automobile used to have a problem where if you opened the door, the car alarm would sound. When I opened the door, I recalled that we had corrected it. There was no alert. My goal was that she would come out and I wouldn't have to knock on the door of a stranger to check whether my wife was there. I was frantic not to go to anyone's home. The light in the vehicle turned on, and I saw her youth baseball bat, which she was using for protection, was sitting straight. I wasn't sure whether she was cheating on me at this point. I was fairly sure she was, but there was a part of me that hoped she wasn't. I grabbed the bat and walked back and forth for another hour, my daughter unusually anxious about why I was seeking for her. She seemed to be shielding her and telling me that I was exaggerating. The more she told me that I was exaggerating, the more terrified I became. She ultimately informed me that her mother was out with a man and provided me his address, the location where I was. Guys, my wife informed our daughter ahead of time that she was going to spend time with a man she found on a dating app, and they both kept it a secret from me. My heart dropped, and I stepped up to the door. My daughter attempted to persuade me that they were only friends. I informed her that she doesn't dress up like that to go out drinking with a man she simply wants to be friends with. I could see a half-naked guy striding back and forth as I was pacing. I opted to carry the bat for my own safety. I had no clue what I was going to enter into and was worried about my safety. That's when a young guy, possibly in his late 20s, opened the door. I informed him that my wife was in the home and that I needed to retrieve her. He purposefully acted foolish and befuddled. He saw the bat right away and was afraid for his safety. I know the optics are bad. I told him I was worried and unclear about what was going on, and that it wasn't for me to be confrontational with. It was for your own safety. He had faith in me. At this time, he speculated that she may be in his roommate's room. He said I didn't need the bat since he was thin, but I wouldn't let go of it. He allowed me in and sent me to his housemate's bedroom. I attempted to open the door, but it was shut. My heart rate slowed even further. I was befuddled, puzzled, and terrified. When I turned back and glanced at my roommate, he knew exactly what was going through my mind, which is funny because I had no idea what was going on through my head. "Don't do that, man," he urged, and it sparked something in me. I got a rush of excitement as I kicked through the door and found my wife nude in bed with a naked guy. It didn't seem like reality for a short second. My rage returned, but not in the way it had in the past. It was a "I'm terrified" shouting expression. I was shouting, "Why the hell is she here?" She had the guts to shout at me and question why I was there at this moment. The man was a real jerk. He stood up, gripping his and smirking and making sarcastic remarks. It took all in me not to retaliate aggressively. I'm not a physically aggressive guy, so I didn't do it, but I grasped the bat hard as he walked out of the room. My wife yelled at me and even asked that I leave the home so she could dress. I couldn't figure out what was going on, so I grudgingly stepped outside to fetch my wife out of the home. She's obstinate, and I knew she wouldn't go until I went outdoors. Because there's a house window from the patio to the garage, I waited outside that front door waiting and witnessed the man come into his garage. Then I saw my wife walk in fully dressed. She embraced him and apologized for what I had done. She had no notion I was able to see. As I raged at her for what she was doing, my blood began to boil. We didn't say anything outdoors, and I battled to keep from puking all over the street in front of his home. I felt deathly sick, and my wife didn't give a about how I felt. This is my 3 children's mother. This is the lady I said I'd spend the rest of my life with. This is the lady I'm madly in love with, and she was treating me with a coldness I'd never seen from her before. I didn't see the lady who kissed me goodbye and said she loved me. I saw hatred. I could see the contempt. I'm really excellent at reading people, particularly my wife and children, but I didn't see any of this. My daughter stopped responding to me as we drove home in different automobiles. She bolted. She has acquired a deep dread of me as a result of my previous rage problems. It's 3 a.m. and she's hiding out in a nearby park until my wife gets home. It was the longest 40-minute trip I'd ever taken. I'm heartbroken, sobbing, perplexed, and enraged. When I arrive home, I'm frantic to locate my kid because I'm concerned about her safety. This is when my wife arrives home and my daughter emerges from the shadows. I attempted to speak to my wife in a courteous and calm way, but she refused. She was exhausted since it was a work night, and she needed to be online for work in 2 hours. At this moment, my daughter informed me that she wanted to live with my wife and no longer had anything to do with me. She said she'd just come to see me out of responsibility. This was the second stab wound in my heart. I couldn't take a breath. I couldn't get to sleep. I couldn't eat anything. I went 7 days without eating and dropped 17 pounds. I became nauseated just by smelling food. I got my wife to chat for a short while, and she told me her goal was to officially adopt my daughter with the aim of raising her as a family, then divorce me and taking her away from me. Later, I discovered that my daughter was messaging my wife and told her that she was recording my phone call with her to use against me in court. I had the talk with her over the phone when I was discovering my wife in bed with another guy and had to wait outside his home while she dressed. I was being plotted against. I felt duped. The previous week and a half has been quite difficult. I traveled back to my hometown to be with my 3 children and family at this difficult period, and I learned a lot from my daughter. My wife had been bad-mouthing me to her for quite some time. They'd been making fun of my bodily concerns and revealing text messages she's been having with the person she's sleeping with. They both continued referring to me as mad and insane, as if I was at blame. I can't imagine dragging a youngster into such an adult scenario. My daughter, as educated and sophisticated as she is still a child. She doesn't comprehend anything, and she's only hearing one side of the story. My wife and daughter had developed a strong relationship as a result of my wife's spending of our money on items like Starbucks so they could spend time together. It wasn't about the money, but about spending quality time together. I was often informed that we were broke whenever I wanted to spend money. My wife obviously controlled the finances. I've been broke for 7 years, yet she's always been able to purchase goods on Amazon. My daughter has every right to be furious with me for what I've put her through, but I believe it has been exacerbated by a shared experience with my wife while she slandered me. If my kid was a 4 out of 10 on an unhappy scale with me, our chats raised her to a 10. My daughter even said to me that she urged my wife to seek mail company. My anger has been horrible throughout her life, and I'll pay for it for the rest of my life, but it hasn't justified the abuse I've been getting. Anyone who knows me will tell you how much I adore my children and how I would go to any length for them. My wife and daughter are now attempting to include her in our divorce settlement. In our divorce decree, she has a non-biological daughter. They want it to be legalized. I'm bewildered, puzzled, furious, lonely, wounded, and astounded. I'm not sure how this news will be accepted in this country. I'm sure there will be people who criticize my fury and behavior, as well as others who are as surprised as I am. I had thought that typing this would make me feel better, but it hasn't. I'm a complete disaster, and the person I need the most to help me get through this hates me, and I don't have any friends in this state to whom I can turn. This is excruciating. We're having a divorce peacefully. For the sake of my children, I had to swallow my pride and swallow my anguish. If I make her suffer like I'm hurting, I'm simply harming my children, which is unacceptable. Stay tuned for the next part.